Alright, what's up guys? We are doing one of the most requested videos on the channel. We are redoing the Blue Eyes tier list. A ton of cards have actually come out. Well, I shouldn't say a ton, probably like 8 new cards have come out for Blue Eyes, and a lot of the placements of the old cards have moved entirely because of those 8 cards, because the meta has shifted. The game is very different now than it was, I want to say 2 years ago or 3 years ago when I did the tier list the previous time. So the game is totally new. A lot of things have very much changed. So not only that, the tier list videos are going to be changing a little bit. I am adding multiple new segments to these tier list videos. I'm going to talk a little bit about the archetype at the beginning, and obviously we're going to talk about each individual card, and at the end we're going to talk about how the archetype can be improved, what cards need to be better in order to make the archetype just stronger archetype basically. But we're doing today Blue Eyes. This deck is actually kind of a diverse deck. You can play it a few different ways. There are 3 main ways to play Blue Eyes. You've got the control variant, which relies on trap cards and some of the new cards like Tyrant Dragon. It's sort of half trap, half fusion build of the deck. That is kind of the control build of Blue Eyes. Then we've got, of course, OTK Blue Eyes, which relies on danger cards and just really strong rank 8s, and just the fact that all the Blue Eyes monsters are just, for the most part, 3,000 attack, 2,500 attack. You can rank them up into a Draglubion and then make a number 100 and basically attack for 9,000 damage. So that's the strong part of the OTK strategy of Blue Eyes. And then of course we've got Combo Blue Eyes, which is kind of like a classic build of Blue Eyes, relying on either the Synchro package or the XYZ package, or you can even play Dragon Links and sort of just spam monsters using the Dragon Link monsters in combination with some of the smaller Blue Eyes monsters like the Stone of Legend, for example. But Blue Eyes is actually a very diverse deck, so it's kind of difficult to grade them because depending on the variant of the deck, it's either really good or kind of just not that great. So for example, the control build of Blue Eyes doesn't really use Stone of Legend, but if you're playing the combo build, you might even max out on this because it's basically a free card every single time that you link it away. So it's actually, it's sort of difficult to grade the cards in that regard, but that being said, let's get started. So first of all, we've got the Dragon Master here. This card's an easy F tier. It is an outrageously difficult to summon monster. It requires Blackluster Soldier, the old ritual Blackluster Soldier, and then it requires Blue Eyes Ultimate. So you've got 2 monsters that are really not that easy to summon, and you've got to fuse them to get this thing. This thing is 5,000 attack, and it gains 500 for every other. It gains 500 for every other dragon on the field other than itself. Good thing they said other than itself. We can't let it come out at 5,500 attack after you have to put in a monster that's 4,500. And that requires essentially 3 materials plus a polymerization and then a Blackluster Soldier, which requires a level 8 and then a fusion spell. A ritual spell, and then of course itself. So it's like a 7-card combo to get this card onto the field, but God forbid it gains 500 attack for itself. It's totally not worth it. There isn't a reason to play it. It's just a terrible, terrible card. And of course, it was printed a very long time ago, and at this point, it's more so a collector's card than anything else. There really isn't a reason to play it. Next, we've got Blue Eyes. This is the Blue Eyes Alternative Ultimate Dragon. This card, I'd say somewhere around B tier. The problem with this card is it's really the investment cost of this card that is the issue with it. It requires 3 Blue Eyes White Dragons to make, which is a lot easier now, to be fair, because Ultimate Fusion exists, because you can fuse using monsters out of your graveyard, which is actually pretty cool. But basically what this card does is it can't be destroyed and it can't be targeted. So it has the same protections as like Chaos Max Dragon. The problem with that is that has actually been significantly power crept in the game. Having a monster that couldn't be destroyed by card effects or be targeted used to be like a really huge deal back in 2016 because most things targeted and most things destroyed, and a lot of decks remain decking 3 copies of Dark Hole, Kaiju Slumber, stuff like that, 1 Raigeki because it was limited to 1. But today there's things like Forbidden Droplets that just destroys this card, and when you have to fuse 3 monsters and if you have to use 3 monsters and a fusion spell to get this thing onto the field, a lot of the times it's just not worth it. It is a pretty cool boss monster. It also has an effect where it can pop a card on your opponent's side of the field And if it uses that effect, you cannot attack with this card, which is again pretty dumb. Like the amount of cards that you have to use to summon this thing onto the field is quite a bit. So to have that idiotic restriction on it, like, why can't you attack? You're only popping one card. If you use Blue Eyes Alternative Dragon to make this card, you can actually pop 3 cards, which is again like still not good enough because you still can't attack. Like, you can't even OTK. You have to use all these resources, summon this thing, pop 3 cards. I end my turn. Like, what was the point of popping these things? And like I said, it's just been power crept really, really badly. Things like I said, Forbidden Droplets destroys this card. You've got Super Poly destroys this card. A lot of things in the game that just, as long as they don't target, will just destroy this card. Shirog from the Tri-Brigade archetype just destroys this card. Anything that does not target just absolutely craps on this card, and for that reason, most of the time it's not worth summoning generally. Next, we've got Blue Eyes Twin Burst. This one is, I've been summoning this less and less and less and less. It's another one that's sort of been power crept. I've seen a lot of decks just totally cut this card. A lot of my decks have totally cut this card. I think with the exception of the control build, I've basically gotten rid of this card. So basically what this card does is it can attack 2 times on monsters. It's a contact fusion, which I really like. That part about the card I really like. It just requires 2 Blue Eyes White Dragons. Of course, alternative counts as Blue Eyes White Dragon while on the field. So it's fairly easy to summon, and again, it's a contact fusion, so you don't have to use the investment of a spell like Ultimate Fusion, or you don't have to use Polymerization, nothing like that. You can just use fusing cards on the field, which is pretty cool. And then it has another effect where if this card battles, and at the end of the damage step, if your opponent's monster is not destroyed by battle, it can banish that monster, non-targeting. Also, this card cannot be destroyed by battle. So if your opponent has like some big monster that can't be targeted, can't be destroyed, has a ton of different protection, and you just attack it, end of the damage step, take whatever damage you take, your monster can't be destroyed by battle, and you just banish that monster. That effect is really cool about it too. The more I talk about it, the more I like it, and the more I want to put into B tier. But again, it's been getting cut so much. I guess we could just put it kind of like the bottom of B tier and make sure to keep it there. But it's definitely, like, it's a good card, but it's not by any means broken. Like I said, most of the time, most decks are actually cutting this card. Next is Blue Eyes Tyrant Dragon. This is an easy A tier. This is one of the new cards. Basically, what this requires is a Blue Eyes White Dragon and any dragon monster. I love that. That is such a generic summoning condition. You can also summon this using a Blue Eyes that is attached with like a fusion monster, which is a little more complicated to set up. You have to use like the classic Tyrant Dragon, but I wouldn't recommend taking that route in any regard. But Blue Eyes Tyrant Dragon is actually a fairly good card. Basically, like I said, very easy to summon. Their fusion requirements are easy. Unfortunately, it's not a contact fusion, but it's still very good because with Ultimate Fusion, all you have to do is shuffle back a Blue Eyes and a Dragon monster, so it's pretty easy to summon. One of the effects that this card has is that it can attack all monsters your opponent controls. This thing is actually 3,400 attack, which again it's pretty decent. 3,400 attack will get over the majority of boss monsters in Yu-Gi-Oh! Because Yu-Gi-Oh! Konami likes to make boss monsters that are right around 3,000 attack, with the exception of Ultimate Conductor Tyranno, which is 32. I'm sorry, it's 35. But most boss monsters are 3,000 attack, so this can get around almost all of them at 3,400, which is pretty cool. It can attack all monsters your opponent controls. And it's totally unaffected by trap cards, which isn't like a super crazy effect, but it does come up. Sometimes it's unaffected by trap cards, so if your opponent destroys True Light, this card won't get destroyed. If your opponent tries to impermanence it, it won't get infinite impermanence. If you use Torrential Tribute, your board won't get, your board will get wiped, but he'll stay around. If you summon this card first and then you activate Skill Drain, its effects will still be applied fully, which is really cool. It's very good in the control build of Blue Eyes. If you summon this card and you have a bunch of trap cards in play, it's actually quite strong. It also has another effect where when this card attacks at the end of the damage step, you can target any trap card in your graveyard and set it back to your field. There's no restriction on literally any trap card. You can set back Skill Drain, you could set back Infinite Impermanence, you could put in a column where one of your opponent's cards are inactivated and negate that column. There's a lot of cool stuff that you can do with this card. It's a really, really strong fusion card. It's probably it's probably the best fusion monster that the deck has access to be 100% honest with you. It even has an argument to be an A tier, an S tier. I might actually move that up as the list kind of progresses. Next, we've got regular Blue Eyes Ultimate. This card's a D tier. The only reason it's a D tier is you can summon it off of Fists of the Unrivaled Tenyi. Otherwise, there's really no reason to play this card. It's just been power crept totally. If Fist of the Unrivaled Tenyi, for those of you that don't know, is a counter trap that if you have a normal monster or a non-effect monster and your opponent activates a card, you can negate that effect. It's basically like a counter trap for Blue Eyes that's not in the archetype. And then if that card's destroyed, you can summon a non-effect monster from your extra deck. That effect is actually quite good. So you can just basically get one of these for free. Other than that, you would never want to actually special summon this card from your extra deck, because you could just, if you can summon this, you can summon the alternative dragon, and there's absolutely no reason to summon this over this if you have the option. Next, we've got Neo Blue Eyes White Dragon. This is a C tier. This card is kind of just decent. So basically what it does is it's just another Blue Eyes Ultimate Retrain, but it's a less good Blue Eyes Ultimate Retrain than Alternative Ultimate Dragon. It has an effect where if it's the only card on your field, you can send a Blue Eyes fusion monster from your extra deck, and then they can gain an additional attack, and you can do that. You can gain that effect twice. So if this is the only card that you control, you just attack and then send something, and then attack and then send something and then attack. But you have to have a bunch of fusions in your extra deck in order to do that effect. And again, you only have this can be the only card on your field in order to do that, which, if you're playing like the trap build, you definitely are going to have some sort of traps. If you're doing the going second route, you're going to have something on the field. If you're doing the combo, like, you're always going to have something on the field. So that stipulation is really kind of annoying, to have nothing else on the field in order to use that effect. Then it has another effect where and this effect's more useful, if this card's in the graveyard and a Blue Eyes card you control is targeted, you can banish this from the graveyard and then negate that effect. That effect is actually kind of cool, because you can send this to the graveyard with like Nadir Servant or Dogmatic Punishment, and then you have access to this card in your graveyard to basically give your cards targeting protection, which is pretty cool. Next, we've got Azure Eyes. I'd say this is an A tier. It's a good card. The only issue with Azure Eyes, it's not Blue Eyes in name, so you can't bring it back. But it's still one of the better protections that Blue Eyes has. Basically what it is you basically use Spirit Dragon and tag into the Azure Eyes, and then it protects all dragons on the field. Also, it has a standby phase effect where it can special summon a normal monster from your graveyard. I think it's a normal dragon from your graveyard during the standby phase. It gives you a lot of recursion. It gives you protection. Yeah, it can't be destroyed, can't be targeted. A lot of your monsters are really big, so you can do this effect, then afterwards activate Skill Drain, and now your things can't be destroyed or targeted, and you have Skill Drain. There's a lot of cool little interactions that you can do with this card. It's a lingering protection effect, so your board is essentially protected for a little while. Plays around things like Lightning Storm going second. Spirit Dragon, I think, is an S tier. It just gives the deck so much versatility in terms of what it can do. So basically what this card does is it has a negate of a graveyard effect, which is already really good. Like, if your opponent activates a graveyard effect, or either player activates a graveyard effect, you can just negate it. So that effect is actually already really, really good. It's good against like the Eldritch matchup, for example, because if your opponent tries to use an Eldritch card, this can actually negate that. It can negate a huge number of different graveyard effects. It can negate the Tenyis, for example. It can negate the graveyard effects of Sword Soul. It's just any graveyard effect it can negate, and the game of Yu-Gi-Oh has become more and more graveyard focused, to the point where the graveyard is essentially a second deck. So this card is very, very good for that graveyard negate. It also has an additional effect where neither player can special summon two monsters at the same time, which is again a very good effect. Like, it's a really random floodgate that just sometimes can really help you. It's one of those things where it's just like, you leave it on the field, your opponent tries to summon two things, it doesn't matter what deck you're playing. Whoa, you can't do that. So that effect is like really randomly on there. And then also its best effect is that you can tribute this, and then you can special summon a light dragon from your extra deck and then destroy it during the end phase. So you can summon a variety of different things, like Michael from the Lightsworns, Michael Lightsworn. You can summon Black Rose Moonlight Dragon to balance Michael, to banish a card. You can summon, of course, Azure Eyes. There's a variety of different cards that you can summon. Stardust Spark Dragon. Yeah, it gives you just a ton of versatility. You can summon a level 8 And then, yeah, you can summon a level 8 Synchro monster, and then you can go into Red Dragon Abyss, for example. There's a lot of really, really cool things that you can do with this card. It's definitely one of the better cards in the archetype for sure. Next, we've got Rider of the Stormwinds, kind of a pointless card. It's not even a Blue Eyes card in name, but technically speaking, it is the first appearance of Sage with Eyes of Blue. It actually came out before Sage with Eyes of Blue was even like a card, but randomly it's like, okay, but Sage with Eyes of Blue is on there. Not sure why. Really, really, really random. I don't know why that is the case, but yep, Sage with Eyes of Blue. This is the first appearance of Sage with Eyes of Blue. Basically, this just, you equip it to a normal monster. That normal monster gets piercing. If this card would be if the normal monster would be destroyed, you could destroy this instead. It's basically like a union monster. I don't know why you would want to play this. Again, the only reason is that Sage with Eyes of Blue is on it. This is regular Lord of D. Lord of D is in D tier. We'll just put it in D tier. Honestly, you can put it in F, you can put it in D. Either way, it's not that good of a card in the deck. It just gives targeting protection to dragon monsters, and that's it. Like, that's it, nothing else. It enables you to use things like Flute of Summoning Dragon. But again, this card has even been power crept. Like, there's a lot of these older cards have just been totally power crept, so there's no point to ever play Lord of D. Outside of like 2003, there hasn't been a reason to run this card in your Blue Eyes deck. Next, we've got Deep Eyes. I'd say this is probably like a C tier. This is one of those cards that actually has gotten better, because you can actually search this off of this guy right here, Abyss Dragon. But this card's actually gotten better. Basically, this is Deep Eyes White Dragon. Unfortunately, it does not have Blue Eyes in its name, which makes it unsearchable with... It makes it unsearchable with Melody. Not Melody. It makes it well, yeah, it's unsearchable with Melody because he has 0 attack. It's level 10, so you can't use it with Trade-in, and you can't search it off a bingo machine because it doesn't have Blue Eyes in its name. So it's got like a lot of things going against it, but you can. It's a free hand trap that you can search off of Abyss. Basically, what it does is when a dragon monster on your side of the field is destroyed, you can special summon this, and if you have a dragon monster in your graveyard, you can target that monster and then make this monster gain attack equal to that monster. And on top of that, you can inflict 600 life points to your opponent for every dragon monster in your graveyard. So it's a cool way to like quickly burn your opponent if you know you're going to go into time, for example. It's a decent way to do that. The only thing is you can't guarantee that one of your dragons will be destroyed. Like, your opponent may just not destroy your monsters. It's one of those, it's like a very responsive hand trap that relies on a very specific thing to happen. So if your opponent like banishes your monster, just attacks you, well, you can't even trigger this card. Yeah, so that's kind of the biggest issue with it. It also has an additional revival effect when this card is actually destroyed. Like, it blows up your opponent's board. But other than that, like, it's a decent card that's actually gotten better and more searchable in a variety of ways. But again, I don't think I can put it into B, A, or S tier because it's just not, it's not quite there yet. It's not strong enough. Unless you literally like had a card that would just give you this for free for no reason without any like bricks attached to it, then I'd maybe play it. But most of the time, this card is just more so optional. Next, we've got Kaiba Man. This is probably an F tier. It's just not relevant in the archetype in any way. It wasn't even really that relevant when it came out. Basically, what it does is you contribute this to special summon a Blue Eyes White Dragon, specifically Blue Eyes White Dragon from your hand, and that's it. It's a warrior. It's just out of archetype. It's power crept, old, out of archetype. No reason to play it, and that's where we'll put it. Next, I'll just do this real quick because it's the alternative. Everybody knows alternative is either S tier or A tier. Probably like high A, low S. Like, this is another one that's just kind of somewhat actually been power crept with one of the newer monsters that I'll talk about later, but it's good. It's weirdly enough, it has a soft once per turn destruction effect where you can target a monster your opponent controls and destroy it. That effect is a soft once per turn, so if you can destroy your opponent's monster, synchro this away, and then special summon it back, you can destroy another one of your opponent's monsters. That effect's pretty cool. And then on top of that, it's got a summoning condition, which oddly enough is a hard once per turn summoning condition. You can only summon this card by revealing it from a Blue Eyes from your hand once per turn. But it's still the best card to search off of the Melody of Awakening Dragon. Like, easily the best card. This and a regular Blue Eyes is just, it's like guaranteed free special summon, basically, of a Blue Eyes. It's good going second. It's good going first. It helps you set up. It's just all around a very, very strong Blue Eyes card. I have cut this card down to 2 in most of my builds. May end up even cutting it to 1 if they release a few more like strong, easy special summons. It's still about as good as it gets in the other regards. Alright, next we've got Priestess with Eyes of Blue. This card, I'd say probably like a C tier or D tier. I never really use her. She's not really that great. I'll probably put in a C tier because she has better text than any of these cards right here. Basically, what she does is when she's targeted, you can send an effect monster to the graveyard and then add 2 Blue Eyes cards, 2 Blue Eyes monsters from your deck with different names. So that effect isn't like terrible. You can actually trigger that effect with Sage, for example. You can trigger that effect with the field spell, the Mausoleum with Eyes of Blue. You can trigger it with those effects, and then you can basically search a Blue Eyes an alternative, which is actually pretty cool. Outside of that, it has an effect where if this card's in the graveyard, you can target a Blue Eyes monster you control, shuffle that monster back into the deck, and then special summon this card from the graveyard. That effect is like, it's very iffy. Like, it's cool because you can special summon a monster from your you can basically recur this from your graveyard, which is actually pretty cool. But the cost of having to shuffle back one of your Blue Eyes monsters back into your deck, considering how difficult they are to get onto the field and how bricky they can be, is really kind of annoying about this card. The card in theory can sometimes sound good, but every time that I've tried to implement this into the deck, I would rather just see a Sage. I'd rather just see a Master, any one of these cards, Protector. Like, literally every single time, I would just rather see any one of the other level 1 tuners than this card. It is the worst probably of any of the level 1 Blue Eyes tuners, unfortunately. So that's why it's in C tier. Probably it could be top of D, bottom of C. Either way, yeah, it could be either one of those. Next, we've got Spirit. This one is a B tier, but it's like a low B tier. It's one of those cards that, depending on the matchup, is very good, and depending on the matchup, is totally dead. So matchups where your opponent relies on maybe like a very important field spell they play 1 copy of, or they play a back row like Eldritch, for example, this card is actually quite good in those matchups because every time it's special summoned, you can banish a spell and trap card, which is really good. It's like a Cosmic Cyclone tied to his forehead, and he's just wiping out back row, which is, again, pretty cool because you can like summon him and then link him away and then use Return of the Dragonlords to bring him back and then banish something else, and then you can Monster Reborn and bring him back and banish something else. Like, you could just banish and banish and banish, and that part of this card is actually really, really good. But again, it's just very matchup reliant. Outside of that effect, which is very, very excellent, it has an effect where you contribute this card and then special summon a Blue Eyes from your hand. That effect, your opponent needs to control more monsters than you do in order to actually use that effect. Both effects are quite decent. The biggest problem with this card, and it's the biggest problem with all of the larger Blue Eyes White Dragon monsters, or the larger Blue Eyes Dragons, which is this card sometimes just gets caught in your hand and it's just dead. It is a brick. Unless you have a trade-in, it's just, this card is just trapped. Like, you do not want to see this card in your opening hand. Most of the time you want to summon it off of a Stone of the Ancients and you want to banish something your opponent controls. You do not want to get caught with this card in your opening hand. That is typically the worst part about this card. It's one of the big drawbacks of a lot of the larger Blue Eyes monsters. But yeah, that's really the biggest kind of like issue with this card. Next, we've got Master with Eyes of Blue. This, I'd say, is another B tier. Basically, what this card does is, on normal summon, it lets you add a level 1 tuner back to your hand. That effect is, again, it's actually quite good because you can add back Sage and then use Sage's like discard effect if you wanted to. So you can normal, add back Sage, use the discard effect, instantly get a Blue Eyes onto the field. I think it's a pretty cool effect. It's a +1 on summon. It's also got another effect where if this card is in the graveyard, what you can do is you can send an effect monster you control to the graveyard, special summon this to the field. Again, it's an effect I actually really like because you can essentially get a free summon out of it. Yeah, I actually really, really like that effect. It summons itself and it sends the monster to the graveyard, so it doesn't like shuffle it back into the deck like Priestess does. But yeah, he's actually quite nice, especially if you play a deck centered around the Mausoleum field spell. If you're playing like a synchro spam deck, it's a good like recovery card. It can one card needle fiber for you sometimes in the right conditions. I actually I like the card quite a bit. Next we've got what is this? Blue Eyes Shining Dragon. This is another F tier. It's I know a lot of last time I did this tier list, a lot of people were like, yeah, but the artwork's really cool. Yeah, I agree, but like it just sucks. Like I'm sorry, it's a terrible card. It's not worth summoning even if you can summon it. Like it's not good. Basically, to summon this card, you have to tribute a Blue Eyes Ultimate Dragon, and we've already discussed how difficult it is to summon a Blue Eyes Ultimate Dragon. It requires a significant amount of resources, or if you are in the decently late game, you can just use Ultimate Fusion. But again, it's just not worth it. Like, are you really going to use Ultimate Fusion to summon Blue Eyes Ultimate and then summon Blue Eyes Shining Dragon? Like, I don't think so. No, it's not a good card. And then once you summon it, hopefully, right, you always hope and you have your fingers crossed that the payoff is going to be worth it. With this card, as always, the payoff is not worth it. Basically, what it does, it gains 300 for every dragon in your graveyard. So if you use Ultimate Fusion to summon that Blue Eyes Ultimate, you now have 3 less dragons in your graveyard. Already off to a bad start. But yeah, it gains 300 for every dragon in the graveyard. And then it has an effect where if this specific card is targeted, you can negate that activation. That effect is not once per turn. You can endlessly negate cards that activate and target this card. If your opponent activates 4 Forbidden Chalices and targets this card, you can negate all 4 of those Forbidden Chalices. It's not once per turn. It's not once per chain. It would have been easier just to put this card can't be targeted on the card, but I mean, I guess that's the other way to do it. So yeah, you can negate any amount of targeting. Again, it's just not worth it. Your opponent doesn't have to target. It can do non-targeting removal, and they can do just generic removal, like a destruction card. Yeah, this card is just not very strong, and on top of that, quite complicated to summon. It's not impossible to summon. It's actually it's easier to summon this card than it's ever been to summon this card. But again, why would you want to? It's just not worth the payoff. Next, we've got Blue Eye Solid Dragon. This is a C tier card, probably like it's like the Priestess and Solid Dragon are like wrestling for who's worst. Solid Dragon has a really good second effect and a really bad first effect. So first of all, it's got 2500 attack, so you can't search it off of the Melody of Awakening Dragons. Also, you can't search this off of the Melody either. I forgot to mention. Not that you would want to, but you can't search this off of Melody. Again, not that you would want to, but yeah, it's not a great card by any means. Its first effect is that when this card is summoned, you can target a monster on your opponent's side of the field and negate its effects. The problem with that is it's like there's never a good time to target and negate an opponent's effects. Monster effects anyways. It's not unless it's a quick effect, and this is an on summon effect. So like, let's say your opponent summons like Alistair the Invoker, and you're like, oh, I gotta do something about this, and you activate an effect that special summons this during your opponent's turn. Once you summon this card, your opponent already activated and resolved that Alistair. Now you can activate your card, target, negate, but they've already resolved their effects, so it's like it's pointless. It's already too late. That's kind of the issue with this card, is it negates the monster when it's already too late. Its second effect I actually think is quite good, which is when your opponent activates a card effect, like any sort of card effect, spell, trap, monster, you can shuffle this card back into the deck and then special summon a Blue Eyes White Dragon from your deck. So that effect is really good. See, with Spirit Dragon, you have to tribute Spirit Dragon and then special summon Spirit Dragon and then special summon a Blue Eyes from your hand, which is not anywhere near as good as being able to shuffle this away and then special summoning a Blue Eyes White Dragon directly from the deck, because you don't have to have anything in your hand to resolve this card's second effect. I wish we could swap the second effect of these two cards, because it would make Spirit Dragon that much better. It'd probably put Spirit Dragon somewhere more up here. But yeah, that second effect is really good, but the first effect is like, it's just you don't get to resolve it until it's already too late. Next, we've got White Stone of Ancients. This is between A and S tier. It's So for the control build, this card would basically be an S tier. But if you're talking about any other build, like the combo build or the OTK build, this card's not quite as good because it's actually a little bit slow. It doesn't get to special summon until your end phase. Which is, again, it's not the end of the world, because sometimes, like, if your board gets Nibiru'd or something, it's fine that your board gets Nibiru'd because you have this in graveyard, so it kind of like splits up the special summons between multiple phases. So even if you get Nibiru'd, you can still get a Blue Eyes out, and if you summon an Abyss out, then you get to resolve both of Abyss's effects and then search 2 cards. So you're not totally out of the game if you get Nibiru'd. So there's some really good positives to this card. Also has a second effect, of course, that we all know, which is you can banish this from the graveyard and then add any blue eyes monster from your graveyard back to your hand. Again, it's pretty good for recursion. Sometimes I'll even use that the first time I send it. I won't even wait for the end phase effect, especially in the OTK build, for example. I don't even wait for that end phase effect because I'm going to OTK that turn, so I'll just get back the blue eyes, activate a danger. That way I have more resources in my hand, so the dangers are less likely to get discarded. So, yep, that effect is pretty good. I'm going to put it in. I'm going to put it in the test here. Realistically, you play at least 1 copy in all 3 builds, so I think that S tier is probably. All right, next we've got Protector with Eyes of Blue, which, don't let your eyes be fooled. This is not a warrior. It is a spellcaster. Protector of Eyes of Blue is basically all of these different, like, what are they called? Eyes of Blue priestesses and sages. They all focus on different parts of the deck. So Priestess focuses on the deck. Master with Eyes of Blue focuses on the graveyard, and this guy, Protector, focuses on the hand. So basically what he does is when you normal summon him, you can special summon a level 1 tuner from your hand, and then it has an additional effect where you can send an effect monster you control to the graveyard in order to special summon a Blue Eyes monster from your hand. If the Mausoleum was a more easily accessible card, I would build a totally level 1 tuner Blue Eyes deck that would just completely use all of the level 1 tuners and a bunch of Blue Eyes, and I would do that effect. And I would build that deck. But the problem is this card isn't particularly easy to search, so this card becomes a little less good, unfortunately. So I think C tier is a fair place to put it. It can help unbrick your hands because it can like spit out different like resources onto your field. It can summon Blue Eyes monsters from your hand that are bricking you, like for example like Spirit or Solid, or just bigger Blue Eyes monsters that are bricking you. But unfortunately, it kind of requires a bit of setup, and it doesn't really gain you on resources. Whereas Master adds back a monster from your graveyard, which makes it a +1. But this card just summons something that you already have in hand, so it's not a +1. The second effect is not a +1. As a matter of fact, the second effect is a -1, and the first effect is neutral. Whereas this is a +1 on the first effect, and the second effect is neutral. So I'd say that's why this card is kind of iffy. It's not quite as good on card advantage. Next, we've got the Whitestone of Legend. Yeah, this card I think is A tier, probably like somewhere around here. It's moved down a little bit. This one is good in the going second build, which plays a bunch of dangers, and if you discard it, you just add a Blue Eyes, and you can basically refill your danger resources for free. It's very good in the combo build, especially if you're playing like a Dragon Link package, because you just keep adding Blue Eyes White Dragon. You can go into Saryuja, shuffle them back, and just keep going over and over and over and over. It just basically adds free resources that you can discard to your hand. So in that regard, that effect is pretty good, but it is absolutely worthless in the control build. You never want to play this card. Adding Blue Eyes to your hand doesn't really do anything. But in those other 2 builds, it's actually quite good. And the cool thing about this card is it's not a hard once per turn, and it's a mandatory effect. That effect is, funny enough, this effect is mandatory. You have to add a Blue Eyes White Dragon after this effect. Like, as soon as this card is sent to the graveyard from anywhere, you have to add a Blue Eyes White Dragon. You have to trigger that effect. So one time I actually had a Blue Eyes on field, 1 in graveyard, 1 in hand. I activated this effect because I had no choice. My opponent ashed me, and I didn't even have anything to search, but I had to activate the effect. So they just wasted an Ash Blossom for absolutely no reason. But I didn't tell them that because, again, I had to activate this card. I had no choice. It's mandatory. Next, we've got the Sage with Eyes of Blue. This card has moved up and down and up and down. I think in the most recent kind of version of the deck. I think it's actually moved back up to A tier. This card is, again, it's actually quite good. Of all of the priestesses, or like the, I don't know what you would call all of these random like people that worship Blue Eyes White Dragon, it's probably the best one out of all of them. It's not the best. It's not the best level 1 tuner, but it is the best of the cards that worship Blue Eyes. So basically what it does is on summon, not once per turn, it can add a level 1 light tuner to your hand. There's a lot of different cards that it can add. It can actually add any one of these that we've read here, the stones, all of the worshippers, and it can also add a copy of Effect Veiler, which is pretty good because you can search a hand trap. Searching a hand trap, you can't beat it, because again, if you get Nibiru, at least you have a hand trap in hand. You can like interact with your opponent's board. Also, that effect is not once per turn, so if you are playing Mausoleum, you can actually double normal summon, search 2 sages for it. You can search 2 effect veilers, and then you have 2 effect veilers to activate on your opponent's turn. Also, this has a second effect where you can send a effect monster you control to the graveyard to special summon a Blue Eyes monster from your deck, which can help you bring out either Spirit, Solid, Abyss. You can bring out Jet. Like, you can bring out any of the larger Blue Eyes monsters that have effects, so you don't have to worry about drawing them and bricking. But unfortunately, again, if you open some of them, it kind of sucks. But yeah, this kind of fixes a lot of problems with the archetype. The only issue is that it's very normal summon reliant, and yeah, it's sort of like the major issue of the card. It's not a free special summon. This deck kind of lacks that, so that's kind of the only issue with it. But overall, I think it's generally a pretty good card. It's a +1 on summon. Next, we've got Maiden. I think Maiden's like a top of C tier card. It's actually, like, it comes in and out of use. Basically, what this card does is when it's targeted by a card effect, you can change it to defense position and then special summon a Blue Eyes White Dragon. I'm sorry, you don't even change it to defense position. If it's targeted, you can special summon a Blue Eyes White Dragon from your deck. And then if it's targeted for an attack, you can change it to defense position and then special summon a Blue Eyes White Dragon. So either way, either your opponent targets it or either player targets it with a card effect, you can special summon a Blue Eyes White Dragon, basically, which is actually quite useful. There are cool things that you can do, like you can target Maiden with Sage, for example, which will allow you to special summon a Blue Eyes White Dragon from the deck and then special summon an additional Blue Eyes monster from your deck. So by targeting this, you actually get to summon 2 Blue Eyes monsters. On top of that, you can use the effect of the field spell to target this to send a Blue Eyes White Dragon, and then you can special summon a Blue Eyes White Dragon. So again, that requires fills 2 requirements. It's like a 1-card Spirit Dragon or a 1-card Crystal Needle Fiber, which is again pretty useful combo starter for the deck. So yeah, this card can actually come in handy in a lot of different situations. It really is only useful, though, in the combo build. It is not useful in any way in the control build. It is not useful in the going second deck whatsoever. So the only version of the deck that this is actually good in is a combo build that is very specifically tailored around the level 1 tuners. It is not good in other variants of the deck. Next, we've got Blue Eyes White Dragon. This is like the OG Blue Eyes White Dragon. Easily S tier. You have to play this. Like, it's not only is it's not one of those situations where the cool thing about this archetype is that despite all of the different support that's been coming out for Blue Eyes, they make it so you still have to play the original Blue Eyes White Dragon, which I actually kind of like. It's not like Cyber Dragons are to the point where I think a lot of Cyber Dragon decks are cutting Cyber Dragon altogether, or they're playing maybe 1 copy. With Blue Eyes, you're always going to be playing at least 2 copies of Blue Eyes White Dragon. Some control builds will play 2 copies, but the majority of like combo builds, OTK builds, will still play 3 copies of Blue Eyes White Dragon. It is one of the most integral parts, or the integral cards in the deck. You must play it in every single version of Blue Eyes. There's never a reason to not play it, because literally the deck will not function without it. Almost all of these cards require Blue Eyes White Dragon in some manner. This requires you to have Blue Eyes White Dragon to special summon it. This requires Blue Eyes White Dragon as a material. Like, just a lot of them require it in some way. A lot of the new ones require Blue Eyes White Dragon to be in the field or in the graveyard. And the only 2 cards that are actually named Blue Eyes White Dragon are Alternative and regular Blue Eyes. So you cannot summon Alternative without Blue Eyes. So it's basically almost impossible to use most of these cards without playing a Blue Eyes White Dragon in your deck. So definitely very important to the deck, and in most builds of the deck will still be a 3-up. Next we've got King of D. This is probably C tier. You can even make the argument it's D tier. It's got a really stupid like stipulation. But basically what this card does is it is Lord of D while face up on the field, which isn't like a huge deal, but you can actually go into the Lord of D fusion if you wanted to. But then you'd have to play... Yeah, the Lord of D fusion being King Dragoon, but then you'd have to play the other card. I forget the name, but there's like a normal monster that fuses to make King Dragoon. But I mean, again, you're not doing all that because it's a 1500 monster. It's out of archetype. It's a mess. Don't do that. Basically, what this card does is you can discard specifically a spell or trap card in order to add either a Flute of Summoning Dragon, Revival Rhapsody, or a Melody of Awakening Dragon to your hand. And that is about it. You can, yeah, basically what that does. I don't like that effect for one very big reason. It has to discard a spell or trap card. That is a completely needless restriction. Why does it have to discard a spell or trap card? Why couldn't it just discard a monster card? Like, again, this is one of those things where there are restrictions for absolutely no reason on a card. Why in the world does that have to be a spell or trap card? Would this card have been broken if it said monster, spell, or trap? Like why in the world did it have to be a spell or trap card? Because the issue is there's a multitude of reasons. The cards you want to discard in a Blue Eyes deck are the monsters. The level 8 large monsters are the ones you want to discard. You want to discard stones. You want to discard the large monsters. That is what you want to discard in a Blue Eyes deck. Why in the world would you make it so you can't discard the cards that you actually want to discard? That's problem number one. Problem number two is there is no recursion for any of these spell and trap cards, with the exception of Ultimate Creature of Destruction, which resets itself for free. Other than that, none of these cards have any recursions. What I mean by this is the spell and trap cards. They do not recur themselves. There isn't a card in the entire archetype that can add back a Blue Eye spell and trap card from your graveyard. Nothing does it. So why in the world would you discard one of your spell and trap cards? It does not make sense. That's just a totally needless, like unnecessary, needless restriction. If that had said you can discard a card to add one of those cards, I still wouldn't play this card. But like for no reason, there's just a restriction that prevents me from wanting to play it. Why they do this stuff, I don't know. And just for that, I'm putting it in D tier. Because you know what? Both of the Lord of D's will be in D tier. It's a needless, stupid restriction that just hinders the deck unnecessarily. And again, if that said discard any card, it would maybe be in C tier. Like it would not be any more broken. It would not be that much better. It's just needlessly bad. So that's why it's in D tier. Next we've got Malefic. Malefic is actually, I'd say, and this is one of those things where it's like, why every time I place Malefic like higher than like F or D tier, people are like confused. So what makes Malefic so good is it's a free special summon if you have a field spell. So if you have a field spell like where did I put this thing? The Mausoleum, or if you have a field spell like a Dragon's Ravine, or if you have a field spell like any Blue Eyes related, any Dragon/Blue Eyes related field spell, any field spell that can be used, Magical Meltdown, for example, if you're playing an invoked version, any field spell that can help you with the deck. If you're playing any one of those field spells, this card is just a totally free special summon. You banish a Blue Eyes and you spit out a level 8 onto the board. It's a Blue Eyes in name, and then you can do all types of different crazy stuff with it. It is good. Yeah, as long as you have a field spell, this card is actually quite useful. If you don't have a field spell based deck, it goes right to the bottom of F tier because it's unplayable. Because it blows itself up if you do not have a field spell. But as long as you're playing a field spell in the deck, it's actually, I always include it. If I am playing a field spell in my Blue Eyes deck, I make sure to include this card because you can actually search it for free off of the Melody of Awakening Dragons. So sometimes you'll open with like a Blue Eyes in hand, so you can melody in order to add an alternative, and then you can also add the Malefic Dragon, and then you get a free special summon and another free special. You get 2 free special summons. It's actually quite nice in those builds. It's searchable with Melody, unlike some of the other dragons like Spirit and Solid. They're not searchable. So yeah, I included that because it's actually quite nice sometimes. Next, we've got a new S tier. I'm very happy to bring this in. I think this is an S tier. I think this is maybe even the second best card in the archetype. This is Blue Eyes Jet Dragon. This card, when they first announced this card, I read it and I was like, it's okay. It's okay. That's what I thought. But then when I actually started to play this card, I realized, wow, this card's actually really good. Like, it's really difficult to out this card. It just keeps coming back over and over and over and over and over. It's actually really difficult to out. It's a free special summon whenever you destroy anything. But yeah, let me tell you about this card's effects before I even glorify it. So basically what this card does is it has a continuous effect where cards you control other than this card cannot be destroyed. So if you have a bunch of back row and your opponent activates Lightning Storm and this thing's on the field, none of that stuff's getting destroyed. If you have a bunch of back row, your opponent activates Harpy's Feathers, none of that's getting destroyed. If you have this card on the field and your opponent activates like Dark Hole, this is the only card that gets destroyed. It just kind of like absorbs all of the destruction effects, and this is the only card that gets destroyed. That effect is very, very good. It also, it just protects you from any destruction whatsoever. It's actually even better than having like an alternative that can't be destroyed by battle or card effect, because this protects everything else, whereas this just protects itself. And if this gets outed, it's just gone forever. The other effect of this card is also really good. That was the continuous effect. Then it has two more effects. Both of those effects require you to have either Blue Eyes on your field or in your graveyard. So you have to make sure to do that before you can use these two other effects. But remember, alternative and regular Blue Eyes, not any of the others. You have to have a Blue Eyes White Dragon, field or graveyard, which isn't impossible, which is actually quite easy to do, but it is kind of like something that you needlessly have to do. But basically what this card does is if you have a Blue Eyes White Dragon in your graveyard or field and a card on the field is destroyed, you can special summon this card. You can destroy a card on your opponent's side of the field. You can destroy, if a card's destroyed on your side of the field. If you activate alternative to pop an opponent's card, you can special summon this card. If you attack something during the battle phase, you can special summon this and then attack again. If your opponent destroys one of your monsters, you can special summon this. That is a once per turn. This card essentially comes back every single turn. As long as you have one of these in the graveyard, it's like an endless nightmare for your opponent, because it's just a free recursion card that just keeps coming back and coming back and coming back and coming back. It is one of the best support cards that the deck has actually gotten. The only thing that would be better for support for this deck would be if they just gave it just a totally free special summon. That would be better, but this just keeps coming back over and over and over. It can activate in the damage step. It can activate in just so many different areas of the duel, and your opponent just will forget randomly. They'll just like MST your back row and this thing will come back. They'll like attack some weak monster because you're losing card advantage. This thing will come back. It's really, really, really annoying for your opponent to deal with, but it's such a strong card. On top of that, if you get two of them onto the field, nothing on your board can be destroyed. And it has a third effect, which is when this card battles, you can target a card your opponent controls and bounce it back to their hand, which is, again, just kind of like a free effect. That's probably the least useful of the three effects, but it's still a very good effect. You can just bounce a card randomly that your opponent controls. Yeah, it definitely comes up. I mean, I don't have any issues with that effect. Definitely a pretty good effect. But yeah, this is easily one of the better cards out of the new wave of support that the deck has gotten. Next, we've got Blue Eyes Abyss Dragon. This one is a bit controversial. I'm going to put this probably at the top of B tier. This card has a very, very big issue, which is when this card's in your deck and you can special summon it onto the field with either Sage or Stone of Ancients, this card is really good. But when you open this card, I mean, you just want to cry. You never want to see this card. It's the last thing you ever want to see in your opening hand. It is so bad to open this card because it's just you have to jump through hoops to summon this card out. If you open with, you have to like trade in and then Monster Reborn. You have to like Melody of Awakening Dragon and then Return of the Dragon Lord. It's such a process to summon this card back to the field if you open it in your hand, whereas if you just have it in your deck, it's great. But if you open it, it's terrible because it doesn't summon itself. That's kind of the issue with this card. But it has multiple effects that are really good. So on summon, it can, as long as you have a Blue Eyes in your graveyard or field, so it has the same stipulation as Blue Eyes Jet Dragon. You have to have a Blue Eyes White Dragon in your graveyard or on the field. So that's to make sure like other archetypes don't use it. So on summon, it can search a polymerization It's specifically polymerization, so not like super poly. Specifically polymerization or any ritual spell in the game, which is pretty good on summon effect because you can search like Chaos Form or Advanced Ritual Art, or you can search just polymerization and then go into some of the various fusions. Unfortunately, it does not search Ultimate Fusion, which is the new form of fusion summoning in this deck, but this is pre-Ultimate Fusion, so I understand why it specifically says polymerization. I get it. I'm not angry about it. But in addition to that, it has another effect where during the end phase, if this card was summoned that turn, you can add a level 8 or higher later 8 or higher dragon monster to your hand. Again, that's a pretty good effect. Yes, it's during the end phase, so it's a bit slow, but you can add alternative. You can add Jet Dragon, which you can actually summon from your graveyard or from your hand. You can add a regular Blue Eyes, not that you would want to, but you can. You can add Deep Eyes, for example. You can add, outside of the Blue Eyes archetype, you can add Chaos Emperor Dragon, Chaos Dragon Levianeer. You can add quite a few things to your hand that is actually kind of useful. Again, yeah, it's just follow-up plays. Just really, really, really strong follow-up plays. Chaos Dragon, the Chaos Emperor Dragon, the Pendulum one, is probably one of the better cards to add to your hand using this card. Again, yeah, it's a pretty good effect. You get to basically +2 on summon with this card. The only issue is it's a little tough to summon sometimes. And then its last effect, which I think a lot of people actually forget, it has an effect where you can banish this card from the graveyard and then make all dragon monsters you control gain 1000 attack until the end phase, I believe. And that effect is, again, pretty good with a variety of cards. Really, really good with Tyrant Dragon. Because again, this card's 3400, can attack all monsters your opponent controls. If you have this effect, you activate it, banish, this becomes 44 and attacks all monsters your opponent controls. That's a lot of damage. I mean, that's really, it's no funny business, right? 4400 attacking all monsters your opponent controls. I mean, that's an OTK. But yeah, this card like is really, really good overall. The only issue with this card is when you open the card in your hand. That's when things really get bad, because unfortunately Sage special summons from your deck, and Stone specifically special summons from your deck. These two special summons specifically from your deck. And that's kind of the bigger issue, is you can't just, like, if you open it and be like, oh, it's no big deal, I'll just special summon it from my hand or deck. No, it's specifically deck. So sometimes this card gets stuck and it becomes a really, really bad card. Borderline unusable. And that's kind of like the biggest issue with that card. That's why it's in B tier. If there was just an easier way to get this out, I'd probably put it in at A or S even. Next, we've got Dictator of D. Oof, this card's really good. So this card's good. It's good. It's really good. I'd probably place it somewhere there. I'd probably put alternative here. I think I put that a little too high. I'd probably put this in S tier. This card is really, really, it's almost perfect. That's the scary part about this card. So basically what it does, it has an effect where if you control a Blue Eyes monster, you can redirect your opponent's attacks. You just summon this, your opponent forgets about it, and now they're crashing into a Blue Eyes White Dragon. That effect is, it's okay. It's not the best. It has an additional effect where it can send a Blue Eyes White Dragon from your deck or hand to the graveyard in order to special summon itself. That effect is really good because you basically can activate this effect, send a Blue Eyes, special summon this for free. It's both a free special summon and it's a Foolish Burial of a Blue Eyes White Dragon. So there's two very, very good effects right there. Yeah, incredibly useful. Like those effects are by no means bad. They are actually really, really strong effects. So that is effect number one. It has a second effect where you can discard a Blue Eyes White Dragon or a card that specifically lists Blue Eyes White Dragon in its text in order to special summon a Blue Eyes monster from your graveyard. So again, that's a larger issue in the archetype, which is some cards require Blue Eyes White Dragon and some cards require Blue Eyes. And that's actually kind of really annoying because it creates a lot of various inconsistencies in the deck where you can discard certain things, but you can't discard other things. Like, for example, you can't discard Beacon of White, and you can't discard Majesty with Eyes of Blue. But you can discard, for example, one of the other spell cards like Chaos Form. You can discard Chaos Form, but you can't discard those two in archetype cards. You can discard Ultimate Fusion, but you can't discard one of the other cards that does not list Blue Eyes in its text. Blue Eyes White Dragon in its text. It can't just say Blue Eyes Monster. It has to say Blue Eyes White Dragon specifically. That's actually really annoying. Again, you can't discard Stone of Ancients, but you can discard Stone of Legend. Which, again, why? Why do certain things require specifically Blue Eyes White Dragon, and certain things are like, oh yeah, just Blue Eyes Monster, that's good enough. Yeah, go ahead, summon it. Like, what is with that in the archetype? It's actually really annoying. Because certain cards just become incompatible with other things. Like, there are search cards like Bingo Machine Go, they just cannot search a large portion of this archetype just because certain things say Blue Eyes in its text instead of Blue Eyes White Dragon in its full. Like, for example, here's another one. You can't discard Sage with Eyes of Blue because it doesn't specifically list Blue Eyes White Dragon, but you can discard Maiden with Eyes of Blue because it specifically says Blue Eyes White Dragon. So that is just a really, really annoying inconsistency in the deck. And this is, I think, the only time where the inconsistency is in one sentence on the card. You have to specifically discard Blue Eyes White Dragon or a card that requires Blue Eyes White, or that has Blue Eyes White Dragon in its text, and then you can summon any Blue Eyes. But the discard has to be Blue Eyes White Dragon. It's mind-boggling. It's like everything wrong with the archetype in a sentence on a card that's actually really good. But yeah, this card's actually really good outside of that. The only other problem with this card is that its attribute is kind of an issue. If this card had been a level 1 light tuner, it would probably be at the top of S tier, and it wouldn't be broken. It wouldn't be like, wow, oh no, Blue Eyes is tier 0. Like, this card would not have been broken if it would have just fit more into the archetype. The problem with this card is it's not a tuner, so you can't go into like needle fiber combos. You can't go into Spirit or any of the tuners, for example. It's not a dragon, so you can't fuse into anything with it. That's kind of the biggest issue with this card. It's out of left field. It's a dark spellcaster, non-tuner, non-tuner, and then also level 4. Like, it's just so out of the norm. Its stats are contrary to everything that the archetype already does. That's kind of the biggest issue with this card. It's just totally outside of the archetype. That's kind of the biggest issue. You can't. Yeah, it's my problem with it. Like, what are you gonna do? You summon this thing. You summon a Blue Eyes from the graveyard. It's like, okay, cool. If you don't have anything else going on in your plays, you're basically just stuck on attack redirection and a Blue Eyes White Dragon. Like, it's not enough. But outside of that, this card is really good. Like, I know I've been somewhat negative about the second half of describing this card, but this card is actually one of the better support cards that the deck has gotten. This and Spirit Dragon are actually really, really strong, and basically are going to be played in every version of the Blue Eyes deck, with the exception of maybe Control Blue Eyes. But yeah, overall, good card. Just has weird, like, consistency issues and weird stats/attributes. Next, these cards I don't think have come out yet, but we're going to talk about them anyway, just so I future-proof this video a little bit. But first, we've got Chronicle Magician. This, I think, is an F-tier card. It just is so outside of the archetype and what the archetype wants to accomplish. I don't even know why this card really exists. I mean, you can make the argument that this is D tier. I don't see myself ever playing it. I just don't. And I've played King. I've played King of D before. I don't see myself ever playing this. Basically, what this card does is if you summon a monster with an original defense or attack of 2,500, you can special summon this card in defense mode for free. This card is a level 7 dark spellcaster. It is just, again, just out of the archetype. I don't know what you would do with that. Like, what are you going to do with that? I guess you can make a level 8. You can make a level 8 synchro with it because you have level 1 tuners. So I guess you could do that. But again, like, why would you want to do that? On top of that, when this card is summoned, you can make a Blue Eyes White Dragon or Dark Magician gain 2,500 attack. And that's another problem in this archetype, which is that they've been recently trying to mix Blue Eyes and Dark Magician quite a bit. And the problem is some of these cards come out lopsided, either in favor of Blue Eyes White Dragon or Dark Magician, or they just suck for both archetypes because they just don't help anything. Like, this is a level 7 Dark Spellcaster. What is this going to do in a Blue Eyes deck? It just doesn't fit. This card does not fit in the archetype. It has nothing to do with Blue Eyes. It's just like, what you don't need 2500 attack boost on a Blue Eyes. If you have 2 level 8s, you can just make a 9000 attack monster. You don't need this. It's just one of those things where people will say, you know, Blue Eyes gets a lot of support, and then you get crap like this, which is, I don't even know how you can even consider this support. It's just laughable. It's just such a terrible card. It's pointless. Should have never been printed. I don't know why it exists. It takes up space in the archetype, and it's one more card that the archetype has that's just not very good. If this card was released in 2003, I still wouldn't play it. Like, that's how bad this is as a Blue Eyes card. I don't see a point why this came out. Again, purposeless. All right, next we've got Chronicle Sorceress. This is another card that is just, it's in the same ballpark as this. It's just a pointless card that people will say, oh, great, Blue Eyes got support again. It's still not good. Because you get cards like this. This card is just terrible. It does nothing for the, like, archetype. Basically, this is a level 4 spellcaster, 1200 attack. What it does is, when once per turn, if you have a light monster in the graveyard, you can send a Blue Eyes White Dragon, specifically Blue Eyes White Dragon, or a card that lists Blue Eyes White Dragon in its text to the graveyard. Remember, Blue Eyes White Dragon does not, the spells and traps cannot be recurred. There's no recursion for Blue Eyes spells and traps. Once they hit that graveyard, they are gone. They are not coming back. There's no point to send a Blue Eyes spell and trap, with the exception of Ultimate Creature of Destruction. Outside of that, why would you want to send any of these cards to the graveyard? It does nothing for the archetype. You can send a Blue Eyes White Dragon to the graveyard, but you can just send, I mean, technically this card's better than the other Magician. You can just send a, you can just use Dictator of D to send a Blue Eyes to the Dragon as cost for its own summon. So that effect is so much better than this effect. That effect will just put a Blue Eyes in the graveyard and give you a free special summon. This card has the exact same stats, but you have to waste your normal summon on it, and then you get to send a Blue Eyes White Dragon. And that's it. It doesn't have that additional effect to do all that cool new stuff, like with the Dictator, let you discard to summon back. It doesn't have that. Yeah, it's just terrible. Like, I don't know why you would play it. And then, of course, this is kind of a larger issue in the archetype, which is it's also a half Dark Magician card, which is if you have a dark monster in the graveyard, you can send a card that has Dark Magician in its text or a Dark Magician. This card is a lot better in the Dark Magician archetype, but again, it's not even good in Dark Magician because Dark Magician has Soul Servant, which is a million times better than this card. It's not. There's no reason to use this card. Like, I don't know why you would do it. It does a portion of what Soul Servant does. It does a portion of what Dictator does. Why would you need it? It does less than what those cards do, and it requires your normal summon. It's just, I don't know why you would want to play this. It's a waste of a card. Plus, it requires you already to have a light monster in the graveyard to even use its effect. It's just pointless cards. I don't know why they would print this. Like, there's so many things that these archetypes actually need to make them better, but they print junk like this. Like, why even make it? Just save it in the factory. Save it on the drawing board. We don't need it. Just leave it. I never import it. I don't need it. Yeah, it's just a bad card. Next, we've got to the controversial cards. We've got Chaos Max Dragon. Put them in. I haven't seen anybody use Chaos Max Dragon in quite some time. I'd say Chaos Max Dragon, honestly, is probably around B tier. Chaos Max Dragon is by no means bad. Then a lot of people call him terrible. The problem with Chaos Max Dragon is it's basically a blind second strategy. And we've got Chaos Dragon here. It's basically a blind second strategy. Obviously, he does double piercing, and he can't be destroyed by card effects or by... It can't be targeted, it can't be destroyed by card effects. He suffers from the exact same thing that Alternative Ultimate Dragon suffers from, which is that not being able to be destroyed by card effects and targeting is not as good as it was in 2016. There's a lot of outs to this card. It's just, everybody main decks some kind of out to this card. It was really, really threatening when you could summon this a couple years ago and your opponent's like, oh, I don't know what to do. They're stuck. They have to go into like... a Utopia the Lightning to out this card back in the day, and then after that they can't out it anymore after that. This card is so easy to out nowadays. You have to summon multiple of them to even be useful. There are various OTK strategies that you can do, like you can summon the um, talismandras, and then you can put them in the incantations, I should say, the incantations to onto the field, and you can give one to your opponent, and then you can automatically just attack and win by 8,000 damage because it does double piercing. You can summon an Ibli to your opponent's side of the field. This is very much in the OTK strategy, but the problem with this card is it's very much, if you don't go second, you don't win. Like, you don't play. The only thing this does, the entire deck does, is summon a Chaos Max Dragon, and yeah, it just summons a Chaos Max Dragon, and that's about it. It summons multiple Chaos Max Dragons going second and tries to attack for a game. That's just not... It doesn't have a going first strategy, and on top of that, it's just not... Again, it very much power crept. I wish this card was better. I really like it. I like the design. I like a lot of things about the card, but I wish it was better. We've got... This is... Blue Eyes Chaos Dragon, not Chaos Max, just Chaos Dragon. Basically, this is just if you can play it with Chaos Max Dragon, it changes all your opponent's monsters to defense mode and then changes their defense to 0. It completely just does not work against Link monsters because Link monsters can never be in defense position, so it just does nothing against that. But basically, the goal is to summon this plus Chaos Max Dragon, attack, change your opponent's monsters to defense, and then attack with the Chaos Max Dragon with double piercing and the game. Generally, it's actually just better to just play Chaos Max Dragon on its own. You don't even have to play this thing. You just play Chaos Max Dragon, give your opponent a 0 attack monster, and then just win the game like that. You don't even have to go through the trouble of playing this thing most of the time, but it was intended to be complementary. Also, it can be destroyed by card effects and targeted, but again, the issue is it can't be destroyed by card effects and targeted, but we've got a major issue, which is that yeah, it's just been power crap. There's too many non-targeting removal outs, non-targeting, non-destruction removal outs in the game of Yu-Gi-Oh! Not as good as it used to be. Next, we've got Paladin. Paladin is like F tier. Its ritual spell is, might as well put it next to it. Its ritual spell is also F tier. All of the Paladin dragons are pretty useless because they just... They require ritual summoning in archetypes that typically don't even have ritual summoning. Also, this archetype doesn't have very many level 4s, so you're oftentimes giving up a level 8 to special summon this thing, which is... why would you do that? And then it has an effect where if it destroys I think it's like a defense position monster, your opponent can't activate flip effects. Again, it's like, why would you... Flip effects are no longer valid in the game of Yu-Gi-Oh! On top of that, it can tribute itself to like summon a Blue Eyes, but again, it's so slow. It requires so much setup. It's just not good. I'm sorry, it's just not good. The problem is it is the very first of the Paladin dragons, so it has the worst effects. It has the worst field. It has the worst ritual spell. At least with the Red Eyes Paladin dragon, the ritual spell actually has like a graveyard effect that can search any Red Eyes card, any Red Eyes spell or trap card. This card is just a ritual spell. It's not good. I'm sorry, it's not good. It's terrible. You don't want to play it. Next, we've got Dragon Revival Rhapsody. This card is quite interesting. Basically, if you control a spellcaster monster, you can special summon up to 2 dragon monsters from your graveyard, including 1 normal monster. Must be a normal monster involved in that. But you have to control a spellcaster to do it, and then I think you can't attack that turn, or you can't do damage that turn. Something weird like that. But I think this card is probably somewhere in C tier. It actually benefits a lot that Relinquished Anima came out. Because Relinquished Anima can turn any of your stones into a spellcaster monster, and then you could take your opponent's monster, and then you can activate this and special summon 2 Blue Eyes White Dragons from your graveyard. So it's somewhat decent. It's also searchable with King of D, but again, I have some serious problems with King of D. Yeah, he's got his own issues. It's why he's in D tier. But yeah, it's actually kind of like a decent tech option. I'd say in a going second deck, you can play it at 1. If you open it, you just make a Relinquished Anima and then go off with that. Also, all of the worshippers of Blue Eyes White Dragon, all of these level 1 tuners are all spellcasters, so this card is compatible with them. The only issue with this card is sometimes you're like in the grind game and you're like very... you're top decking or something like that, and you just top deck this card, and you're just, like, you don't have a spellcaster on the field, and it's just a dead draw. That's kind of the biggest issue with this card, is if you don't have a spellcaster, it just does absolutely nothing. Flute of Summoning Dragon, I think, goes into D tier. It's not the worst card ever, but it's certainly not a good card. I'll say that. It basically just, if you have a Lord of D, you can activate it and then special summon Blue Eyes. Or you can special summon Dragon Monsters, up to 2 Dragon Monsters from your hand. Very, very resource intensive in regards to your hand. Which is probably why it's not very, very good. So, definitely I'd say D tier is probably where it's at. All right, next we've got Neutron Blast. Really cool name, not the best card. So I'll put it next to Blue Eyes Ultimate because that's what it requires. Basically, if you have a Blue Eyes Ultimate Dragon on your side of the field, you can activate this card. That Blue Eyes Ultimate can make a 2nd and 3rd attack during your battle phase. And then on top of that, your opponent can't activate card effects until the end of the damage step. Again, this requires you to summon Blue Eyes Ultimate, requires you to have this card in your hand, because I don't believe that this card is searchable, because it specifically says Blue Eyes Ultimate Dragon, so you can't even like search it off of Bingo Machine Go, for example. So it's not searchable, and then you got to summon Blue Eyes Ultimate, you got to activate this card. Blue Eyes Ultimate can attack 3 times, and your opponent can't activate stuff until the end of the damage step. Not the best card. Again, it just is. You have to remember that Neo Blue Eyes White Dragon, which is in C tier, 1 tier above this card, has this effect built in, except for the your opponent not being able to activate stuff, but it has the 2nd and 3rd attack built into it, and still nobody plays it. So, just doesn't make the cut. It's not good enough. Next we've got Bingo Machine Go. Oh my god, I have so many problems with this card. This card is a B tier card, and it's really, really sad. This was supposed to be like the Great White Hope. This was supposed to be the card that was going to fix Blue Eyes. I remember when it came out, it was like $80. It was short printed. Everybody needed it. Everyone thought this was going to like repair Blue Eyes. Blue Eyes was going to go back to tier 1 status. This one requires a little bit of a story. So Blue Eyes was a decently viable deck until about the end of the mid-year of like 2017, with Maximum Crisis came out, because a card called Ash Blossom came out. Ash Blossom stopped almost all of the search and draw cards of Blue Eyes, because the search and draw cards of Blue Eyes always had a discard cost. They always had a discard cost of some kind. It was like trade in, discard at level 8, draw 2 cards. Melody of Awakening, discard a card, draw and add 2 Dragon Monsters to your hand. They always had a discard cost. When those cards got ashed, you basically went -1 every single time. So if you went first and you got ashed on one of those cards, you are stuck with 3 cards left in your hand, and your duel is, you're in rough shape. You're playing Blue Eyes, you got a lot of level 8s in your hand, you're stuck with 3 cards. There's not a lot that you can do, unfortunately. So the deck needed just a search, like a straight up search. Like, you activate it, you get 1 card. If it gets ashed, you still have 4 cards in your hand. That's what Blue Eyes needed. It needed consistency. What they gave Blue Eyes is one of the least consistency cards I've ever seen in my life. You have to reveal 3 cards from your deck. First of all, this card's a hard once per turn. Unlike Trade-In, unlike Melody of Awakening Dragon, this is a hard once per turn card. You have to reveal 3 cards from your deck, and then your opponent picks one at random. At random. How do you give a consistency card a random clause? Why would you do that? That's so bad. Why would you make it so the card that helps you like play more consistently is inconsistent in its build? So plus that's not even the worst part of this card. The second part of this card that makes it so bad is you can only add a monster that says Blue Eyes in its name. So there's a lot of cards that you just can't add. You can't add any of the level 1 tuners, which are the cards you actually want to see in your hand. You want to have those in your hand. The only cards that you want to see in your hand are Alternative and the level 1 tuners. You don't want to have anything else in your hand, because you almost always have a Blue Eyes in your hand. That's, that comes with the territory. You're playing Blue Eyes, you're going to have an open to Blue Eyes. I mean, it's a natural part of the bricking lifestyle. You're going to have a Blue Eyes White Dragon in your hand. What you actually want to see is these stones. It doesn't search any of the stones. It doesn't search any of the worshippers. It does not search any of the level 1 tuners. It only searches the level 8 bricks that you never want to open in your hand. The entire archetype is one hand trap. a single hand trap. It's Deep Eyes White Dragon. It can't search it because it doesn't have Blue Eyes in its name. So the only cards that you would want in your hand, you actually can't search. And the cards that you would never dream of wanting to draw, you can search. Like Abyss, you don't want to open this. Like Solid Dragon, you would never want Solid Dragon in your hand. You never want Spirit in your hand. You don't want those cards in your hand. But those cards you can add to your hand. So that's already another problem. On top of that, the other card that it can search is a Spawn Trap card that specifically lists Blue Eyes White Dragon in its text. Again, we have a lot of issues on our hand because there's a ton of cards that don't list Blue Eyes White Dragon in its text. It just says Blue Eyes card. Like Beacon, this just says Blue Eyes card. What else? Majesty, this just says Blue Eyes card. The Mausoleum doesn't mention Blue Eyes or Blue Eyes White Dragon in its text. It just mentions sending a normal monster to the graveyard. So it can't even search some of the better cards in the archetype. That is a huge, huge issue with the card. It doesn't even search all of the different cards that you would want to search. As a matter of fact, it searches like 50% of the archetype when it's the search card. On top of that, this card, again, it has a random clause. You reveal three cards to your opponent. They don't have to be different. You reveal 3 cards to your opponent. Your opponent picks one at random. That means that if you specifically want a card, like let's say you really, really wanted True Light, you would have to reveal 3 copies of True Light. But if you reveal 3 copies of True Light, you have a very high chance of actually just drawing the damn True Light because you're playing 3 copies. So that's another part of the thing, is consistent decks, good decks that are good. Decks like, for example, Sky Striker. Sky Striker is a very consistent deck. Sky Striker has spell and trap cards that are 1,000,000 times better than the Blue Eye Spawn trap cards, and they only have to play one of those cards. And the reason that they only have to play one of them is because they're searchable. This card requires you to play 3 of a card in order to make it searchable. But if you're playing 3, you're likely to just open it. And half of these cards are hard once per turn, so you would never want to open 2 copies of this card. You would never want to open 2 copies of True Light, because 2 copies of True Light is terrible. It's a hard once per turn. On top of that, like let's say for example, you're midway through the duel and you already have an alternative in your hand. And you are playing 3 copies of alternative. Like you have an alternative, but it's in the graveyard, and you really, really need an alternative. You can't even just straight up search the alternative. You have to play this random game where you reveal, I'll reveal 2 alternatives, and I'll reveal 1 copy of True Light, and hopefully things work out for me. And then they don't work out because your opponent just happens to pick the True Light, and now you just lose because you can't put a monster on board. Those are the kind of issues involved with this card. It's random. It's just such a bad search card. Everything about this card is just not good. The only reason that I even put it in B tier is because it's all we have. That's what we're stuck with. And it's probably the best card to set off of a copy of True Light. This is easily the best card to set off of True Light because it's the only way that you can plus off of True Light if you do not already have a Blue Eyes White Dragon in play. Like if you draw an awkward hand, you just set the True Light, and then you can activate to set the Bingo Machine into your back row. Next turn, you activate the Bingo Machine, reveal 3 Blue Eyes White Dragons, and add a Blue Eyes to your hand, and now your True Light is live, and you can summon the Blue Eyes. That is the only reason that this card is even in B tier and not in like D tier. That is the only reason. It's because True Light came out. This card is actually like terrible. The only other version of the deck this card is not that bad is in the Chaos Max build, because in the Chaos Max build, all of the ritual monsters actually say Blue Eyes in their name, so it's fine to add them because obviously you want to ritual summon them, and because obviously you ritual summon from your deck. The other area where this card's actually good is that you can actually add Chaos Form with it. I don't know if Chaos Form is here. I must have forgotten to put Chaos Form. Chaos Form should really be here, but you can add Chaos Form off of this card, and you can add the larger ritual monsters. That's about it. That's like the only redeeming qualities. If True Light hadn't come out, and if it wasn't usable in the ritual version, it is one of the biggest busts in just the entire archetype. It was supposed to solve so many problems, but it's the most inconsistent consistency card in like the game. It is so inconsistent. Why would you make a consistency card random? It's mind-boggling. I don't even want to talk about it anymore. Next, we've got Burst Stream of Destruction. This card is probably like let's say like a D tier. It's basically Raigeki if you control Blue Eyes, and then Blue Eyes can't attack. The can't attack doesn't even matter because you can just make an XYZ monster or Link monster, Synchro monster, and then you can just attack just fine without it. But yeah, it's actually a decent card. It's searchable off of Bingo Machine Go, but again, you have to play 3 copies if you really want to get it. And it's also searchable randomly off of the Mausoleum with Eyes of Blue. It's actually searchable through, yeah, it's searchable through that. Really random, but it is. If this card's in the graveyard, you can banish it, search the Burst Stream of Destruction. Kind of a random effect, but decent. Just because if you draw multiple field spells, because you're obligated to play multiple, because there's no way to search like this card in the archetype, and you have to play multiple, sometimes you open 2, you can just activate, and then activate again, and then just banish, add Burst Stream. Next is Soul Successor. I think this is like a C tier card. It's like the best card, but it's got some cool, like, weird usage about it. So basically, you can tribute a monster, and then tribute an effect monster, and then target a monster your opponent controls that's an effect monster. Send that opponent's monster to the graveyard, and you can special summon a level 7 or higher normal monster from your deck. Basically, it has Blue Eyes in the artwork. I don't even know if this is one of those, again, it's one of those situations where it's really just normal monster support, but Konami threw a Blue Eyes White Dragon into the archetype. I mean, into the artwork, so it looks like it's like, oh, look, we got Blue Eyes. Like, in reality, it's just normal monster support. You can use this in Red Eyes. You can use this in Dark Magician. You can use this in any archetype that uses a normal monster that's level 7 or higher. You can use this in Heretics if you wanted to. But basically, yeah, it's a weird card because it's a quick play. So technically speaking, you can use it going first or second because you could just set it, and then during your opponent's turn, you tribute like an effect monster and send a monster your opponent controls to the graveyard, summon a Blue Eyes. So in that regard, it is kind of a little versatile. Also, you can use it going second because obviously you can out things. The only thing is you can only attack with 1 monster for the rest of the turn after you activate this card. Again, a very needless, totally needless restriction. Like, you are not going to OTK because you give up 2 monsters to send a monster and summon a monster. This card goes totally neutral, and then you can only attack with 1 monster. Like, just needless restrictions on cards that are already not that great. I don't know why they do it sometimes. But yes, I'd say somewhere around C tier, kind of a versatile card. It doesn't have Blue Eyes anywhere on its text, so you can't search it. You just play it at 1 and hope you don't see more than 1. That's the goal with this card. All right, next we've got Beacon of White. I think this is kind of like a D tier. It requires 3 Blue Eyes, not Blue Eyes White Dragon, Blue Eyes monsters in your graveyard. If you have 3 Blue Eyes Dragons in your graveyard, you can target a Blue Eyes monster from your graveyard and then attach this card to that card. So it's basically like Premature Burial. If this card leaves the field, you banish that Blue Eyes card, which is what separates it from Premature Burial, because you can't like re-loop. You can't endlessly loop, unfortunately. But on top of that, what this card also does is for every Blue Eyes card in your graveyard, you can attack with this card that many times. Also, this is the only card that can attack. So it's kind of like a decent card. Again, another card not searchable with Bingo Machine Go. Another card you can't set off a True Light. Another card you can't discard for Dictator of D because they've decided to go in 15 different directions with the archetype. But that is kind of like the biggest issue with this. Also, it requires quite a bit of setup to bring back 1 Blue Eyes. It's not worth the payoff. You're better off just playing Return of the Dragon Lords or Monster Reborn or Silver's Cry. There's just better cards that do better things without having a bunch of stuff in graveyard to begin with. So definitely, I'd say D tier is probably where it's at. Next, we've got Majesty with Eyes of Blue. This is another really like weird card. Another card that mentions Blue Eyes, has Blue Eyes on the picture, but it doesn't say Blue Eyes White Dragon. So you can't get it off a Big Machine Go, and you can't set off a True Light, and you can't send it to the graveyard with the Dictator. So yeah, it mentions Blue Eyes. So what it basically does, if you can send a Blue Eyes monster to the graveyard from your hand or from your deck, so it's like a Foolish Burial, and then you can target 1 monster on the field, and it can't attack that turn. This card is like, it's like a very slow Foolish Burial. It would be half decent if you can set it off of True Light, which you can't because it doesn't say Blue Eyes White Dragon. But because you could just block an attack for a turn and then set up a Blue Eyes White Dragon the following play that you can summon off of the True Light. But unfortunately, you can't do that, so we're stuck with Bingo Machine Go. But yeah, it's kind of like a D tier. Blocks in attack. It's a little slow. Not really good enough. A tier Melody of Awakening Dragon. Easily one of the better searchers in the deck because all you have to do is discard any card and then you add any monster with 2,500 or is it 3,000 or more attack and then 2,500 or less defense. I think those are the ratios that you need to fulfill. It searches a lot of cards. It can search any of the Chaos Emperor dragons. It can search Chaos Dragon Levianeer. It can search some of the Odd Eyes cards, weirdly enough. It can search, obviously, Alternative. It can search the Goat, which is the Jet Dragon. It can search a lot of cards. Regular Blue Eyes it can search. It actually is quite a decent card. If you're playing the combo variant, this card is very important. If you're playing the the combo variant, and if you're playing the going second version, this is really important because it obviously gets you to alternative really fast. But yeah, very good card. One of the better searches. This card is actually searchable. You can search it with the King of D, but again, let's be realistic. Next, we've got a card I actually really like, which just for principle, I'm going to put above the Bingo Machine Go. Yeah, I like this. Mausoleum of White is really good. It has 4 really strong effects on it. It's a field spell that basically, number 1, it gives you a double normal summon of the tuners, of the level 1 tuners, which is pretty good because a lot of the level 1 tuners actually have on-summon effects. For example, Sage has an on-summon effect that's not once per turn, so you can search 2 effect Veilers if you summon 2 Sages. You can master, for example, you can add 2 cards from your graveyard because they're not once per turn. The on summon effects, Protector, Priestess, you can summon any one of these twice, so 2 level 1 tuners, pretty cool. Secondly, it has an effect where you can target a monster you control, send that monster, and then target a monster you control, send a normal monster to the graveyard, and then boost that monster that you targeted by 100 points times the level of the normal monster that you sent. So basically you can target like a Maiden and then you can send a Blue Eyes and then you can special summon an additional Blue Eyes. Pretty cool. You can just kind of target any effect monster and then send a normal monster and then gain attack. That's kind of like a cool additional effect that this card has as like a targeting, sending, and on top of that, if this card's in the graveyard, you can banish it in order to search a Burst Stream of Destruction for free. So all 4 effects are actually really good. This card has double summon on it. It has Raigeki through the Burst Stream. It has a Reckless Greed sort of effect where you can gain 800 attack points until the end phase. And on top of that, it has an additional effect where it can just Foolish Burial Blue Eyes White Dragon. So it has 4 very useful effects on one field spell. The only issue with this card is, again, it is just not searchable. It doesn't mention Blue Eyes White Dragon in its text. It doesn't even mention Blue Eyes in its text. It is not searchable. You have to play 3 copies of this card and a Terraforming. You can also play a set rotation, but then you're stuck playing some suboptimal field spell in addition to that. So that can be a little bit problematic. The problem is you're just not guaranteed to see this card in your opening hand. And sometimes you draw multiples of this card, and it's just kind of a dead card after the first one. You only really need one. Something that they get right, something that Konami gets right, is that a lot of archetypes have really broken field spell, and despite that, they only play 1 field spell. Like if you ever notice, Orcust has one of the greatest field spells of all time. Orcust makes it so every one of their effects becomes quick effect. Like that is just so outrageously good. Every Orcust effect becomes a quick effect. You can use them during your opponent's turn. All of the banish special summon from hand, banish send to the deck, all of that stuff becomes a quick effect during your opponent's turn. Galatea, all of those effects become quick effects. It's absolutely insane of a field spell. And despite that, they only play 1 copy because it's searchable. It's easy to access. Whereas with this archetype, nothing is searchable. Nothing's easy to access. It's actually completely inconsistent in how you acquire the cards to your hand because the best search spell has a randomness factor to it in addition to just not being that good overall. And that's kind of the frustrating part about this card is it's not searchable, and you can't just play 1 and be like and just drop it You can't just, there's nothing in the archetype that you can just normal summon, search this, or like maybe have like a synchro monster that searches this, or a link 2 that searches this card. There's nothing that searches this card for free, which would actually make this card very, very useful in the archetype. Unfortunately, there's nothing like that in this archetype that can allow you to access this. So you're stuck playing as many copies as you can and hoping you draw as little as you can. But it is overall a very, very, very good card. Next, we've got Rampage with Eyes of Blue. There's another D tier. It's not a good card. Basically, what this card does is you activate it, you banish every single card that you control, and then you special summon Blue Eye, and it's every card you control and in your hand. You banish everything you control and in your hand. And then you special summon up to 3 Blue Eyes White Dragons specifically from your deck. It can't be from your hand. And you know, as a Blue Eyes player, you are bound to brick and draw at least 1 Blue Eyes White Dragon. There is never a time where you don't at least draw 1 Blue Eyes White Dragon. So you activate this, and then you banish everything, and you summon 3 Blue Eyes White Dragons. I don't know what they were thinking with this card. I don't know what they expected you to do with this card. This card isn't even good as like, oh, it's good in the grind game. Like it's not even good in the grind game because most of your Blue Eyes White Dragons are in your graveyard or in your deck already. So there's never really a reason. You're never going to be like, oh, my life points are getting low. Got to make things happen. Let me just drop this, summon 3 Blue Eyes. Your Blue Eyes are in your hand. They're in the graveyard. They're on the field. There's never a time where you would have low life points and you just need to drop 3 Blue Eyes White Dragons immediately. It's just a very, very niche, weird card. You can set it off of the True Light. You can search it off of the Bingo Machine Go, but despite that, I don't see myself ever playing this at more than 1. And again, this is really random. You can't specifically set this. So that's kind of an issue with this card. It's not very good at all. Next is Dragon's Fighting Spirit. There's another like D, probably even F tier. Basically what it does is for every month you activate it, target a dragon monster you control. For every monster, target a dragon monster that was special summoned that turn. And then for every monster that your opponent special summoned that turn, that monster gains an additional attack. The problem is you have to special summon it in the same turn that your opponent special summoned those monsters. So like, when are you going to activate this card? It's such a weird like stipulation. You would have to like Silver's Cry during your opponent's turn to summon Spirit, and then activate this during your opponent's turn, targeting Spirit in order to, and then count the amount of monsters that your opponent controls that were special summoned, and then the following turn the Spirit would get 5 attacks, assuming your opponent summoned 5 monsters. So your monster would have to have survived that entire turn. Your opponent had to special summon a bunch. It's such a weird like combination of effects. The only reason it's even here is because it has Blue Eyes on the artwork, but in reality it's not even really like a Blue Eyes card per se. Just kind of like a dragon support card that's not very good. So it is where it is. Next is Silver's Cry. I think this is like a C tier card. It's been power crept for the most part. Unfortunately, something else that they sort of gave up with is that Blue Eyes is no longer like a normal monster archetype. With the exception of regular Blue Eyes and Spirit, they haven't made any of the new Blue Eyes monsters become normal monsters like Spirit Dragon does. Like Spirit Dragon is a normal monster on the field and in the I think it's in the graveyard and in the hand or something like that. It's a normal monster. So Spirit Dragon can actually be very, very useful because it's a normal monster in the graveyard. You can bring it back with Silver's Cry, and then you can banish a spawn trap card your opponent controls on summon. That effect is actually kind of cool. But unfortunately, they've totally like made a left turn, and they're just no longer. They're like, oh, the normal monster thing, don't worry about it. We're not doing that anymore. So this card just naturally became power crept. Just kind of faded into obscurity, unfortunately. Also, the game is kind of sped up, where summoning 1 Spirit Dragon during your opponent's turn is just not good enough. Summoning 1 Blue Eyes during your opponent's turn is just not good enough. So this card's just been completely power crept. But as a, like, functionally, it's actually a decent card. It is a quick play. It's got some good effects. But again, functionally, it's been sort of power crept. Next, we've got Strength in Unity. This card is probably either a C tier or like a D tier. I'd probably say a C, bottom C tier. This card is kind of like, again, another one that's kind of iffy. If you summon a monster, a fusion monster that has Blue Eyes, that you had used Blue Eyes White Dragon as material, or a ritual monster that uses Blue Eyes White Dragon as material, you can banish a card your opponent controls or in their graveyard, which is, and it targets. It targets and banishes a monster in your opponent's graveyard or on their field. That effect would be a lot better if it didn't target, and it wouldn't be broken if it didn't target, because you actually have to put in a reasonable amount of resources in order to fusion summon or ritual summon. Like, ritual summoning requires at least 2 cards, right? Even if you have Advanced Ritual Art and a Chaos Max Dragon in your hand, that's at least 2 cards. It's at least 2 resources. Fusion summoning, don't get me started on fusion summoning. It usually, unless you're mid-game and you've already got a lot going on, then you activate Ultimate Fusion, then it requires 1 card. But for the most part, it usually requires 2-3 cards to actually ritual summon or fusion summon, even in the best case scenarios. And the only payoff you get is to target banish. I mean, come on, target banish, that's it. And then it has another effect where you can send this to the graveyard, and then you can add a Blue Eyes White, a level 7 or higher normal monster from your graveyard back to your hand. Which, again, you have to get rid of this card, and you add back a normal monster to your hand. Which, okay, cool. You have a normal monster in your hand. Guess you can ritual summon with it later, or fuse with it later. But if you used Ultimate Fusion, you don't even have a normal monster in your graveyard. And a lot of these effects, like Abyss and Jet, actually require you to have the Blue Eyes in the graveyard. So you don't want to, you don't want to actually add it back to your hand. You want the Blue Eyes to be in the graveyard. So that's kind of the issue with this card. It's kind of counterintuitive. First of all, the banishing effect should have been non-targeting, and it wouldn't have been broken. And the second effect, which is the adding back, should have just been an effect that's once per turn. Once per turn, you could add back a normal monster that's level 7 or higher back to your hand. Both of those effects should not have had any sort of cost stipulation. And again, I don't even know if you were to fix those 2 cards and make them better. I don't even know if I would have still played this card. Because it's not all that great. It adds back a Blue Eyes, like in a Blue Eyes deck. Why would you want to add back a Blue Eyes White Dragon? Stone already does that. And I rarely use the effect of Stone to bounce back a Blue Eyes. Usually add back alternative. Usually don't even add back the regular Blue Eyes. So even the deck already does that. And the banishing effect, again, you banish a monster your opponent controls, targeting. You really don't need to. It's a targeting effect. The only thing that this deck sometimes has trouble with is like maybe boss monsters. And most boss monsters can't be targeted anyway. So like this card just doesn't really solve a niche. And on top of that, it requires a ton of resources to actually do anything productive. And it doesn't have a graveyard effect of any kind. It's just kind of a lackluster card. Next is Vision with Eyes of Blue. This is a newer card. I'm going to put it into high C tier. It might be B tier, depending on what kind of build you play. But this card is very resource intensive in the sense that it needs a lot of cards in your hand. It's good in very much just the opening of the duel. Like, that's about it. It's very good in the opening of the duel, and after that, it's kind of like, you don't want to see this card ever. It's good in the opening, and again, it's not with Blue Eyes. There's nothing that can, like, you can't just search this card and then use it one time and then not have to worry about it. You have to. There's no way to specifically search this card, so you have to play 3 copies and then a bingo machine if you want to open with this card, and it's a hard once per turn. So if you open with this card, sometimes you open 2 copies, they're useless because it's a hard once per turn. But what this card basically does is on summon, you can reveal Blue Eyes White Dragon, and you can summon a monster from your hand. That effect is actually kind of good. It's almost like a reverse. It basically turns every single monster in your deck into an alternative Eyes, because you just reveal a Blue Eyes and special summon anything. It doesn't even have to be a Blue Eyes card. You can summon any monster. So that effect is actually kind of decent. Again, it's only really good if you have a lot of cards in your opening hand. Past your first turn, this card is like dead. Secondly, it has an effect where you can return a monster you control back to the hand, and depending on what you returned, you can summon a monster to the field. So if you return a Blue Eyes White Dragon from your field back to your hand, you can summon any monster from your hand to the field. So you can summon a lot of these like dead brick monsters, like Spirit and Abyss. If you open them, for example, you can spit them out onto the board. Next, if you returned any sort of monster to your hand, so yeah, if you return any monster to your hand, doesn't even have to be any of these. Even if you return like a hand trap to your hand, you can special summon a Blue Eyes White Dragon. That effect again is it's like a decent effect. It's not a bad effect by any means, but it's definitely got its issues. Just because it's very resource intensive. It requires you essentially to have a very monster heavy hand, very low on spells and trap cards, and at that point this card actually becomes somewhat useful. It deals with a lot of the problems of having bricks and blue eyes. The only problem is, again, outside of the first turn, it's basically like it's not a card you ever want to see. Next, we've got Ultimate Fusion. This is one of the newer cards. I'd say this is probably at the top of A tier. You can even make the argument it's an S tier card. I'd say it only has one real like drawback. So basically what this card does is you can fusion summon a monster that has Blue Eyes White Dragon in its materials. And basically what this card does is fusion summons it. You can summon using cards from your field, hand, and especially the graveyard. Because a problem that Blue Eyes always had in the past is that you could put the Blue Eyes White Dragons into the graveyard and then your stones would just be dead because you don't have any more Blue Eyes, like, you don't have any more Blue Eyes White Dragons to play with, because all of your stones, basically all your Blue Eyes are either in the graveyard on the field or in your hand, and then your stones are just completely dead because you can't summon anything else out of your deck because your deck doesn't have any more Blue Eyes cards. But this card basically puts them back. That's one of the very positive things of the card. The other thing that this card does is, fusion summons it, and then for every monster, every Blue Eyes White Dragon that you use as fusion material from the field, you can destroy cards your opponent controls, non-targeting. That effect, again, is kind of like a bonus. It's free, it's a bonus. Also, this card is a quick play, so you can use it during your opponent's turn as an interruption. So if you have like a Blue Eyes White Dragon, your opponent like chains something to destroy the Blue Eyes, you just chain this, and then you get rid of your Blue Eyes White Dragon back into the deck, and you can destroy cards your opponent controls. So it's pretty cool. The destruction effect, the non-targeting destruction. The only issue with this card is a lot of the new support like Abyss and Jet require Blue Eyes White Dragon to be in the graveyard. So sometimes shuffling back a Blue Eyes White Dragon can actually be somewhat costly because it turns those other cards off. Like sometimes there have been duels where I've used this to shuffle back a Blue Eyes and now Jet is completely dead. And it's not like any of the fusions say Blue Eyes White Dragon on the field or anything like that. They're just fusions. So that is one of the kind of like iffy effects about this card. The other thing that would have made this card slightly nicer is if it allowed you to shuffle back from Banished, in addition to just shuffling back from the graveyard or shuffling back from the hand, graveyard, or field. Shuffling back from Banished, I think, would have been a nice addition to it. It's something that the Cyber Dragon card has. Sometimes your Blue Eyes White Dragon gets banished off of like a Call by the Grave from your opponent or something like that. Your opponent has some sort of like a banishing effect, like a Shirag or something like that. Sometimes it can really be useful to actually be able to banish, to shuffle back the Blue Eyes White Dragons that are banished. Sometimes you banish your own Blue Eyes White Dragon for like a copy of Chaos Dragon Legionnaire, and there's really no way to re-access them into your deck. So it's kind of nice to... It would have been nice to have the ability to shuffle back from Banish too. And again, it's one of those things where if that had been on the card, this card wouldn't have been broken. It just would have been like 5% better because there would be certain situations where Blue Eyes got banished and it would be nice to have access to it. Also, your opponent couldn't just like, you activate this card and your opponent's like, oh, okay, Call by the Grave the Blue Eyes, and now you can't resolve it. You could just just use it from the Banished if you really needed to. Other than that, this card is pretty much perfect. It's really, really good. That's the only like drawback that I have for it. The other issue with this card is that Verde Anaconda got banned, so you can't just make two materials and then use this card. This is one of those rare fusion spells that is not broken with Verde Anaconda, because it's not you can just spit it into any deck, because it requires you to shuffle from your graveyard, hand, or field. You can't just send to the graveyard from deck. That's kind of the only... It is actually very, very, very fair with the Verde Anaconda. There was never a point where I was like, oh, this is a really broken interact. It was just a completely fair fusion summon. It just slightly kind of like cheated a little bit. But yeah, I'd say it's a pretty good card. Next is Destined Rivals. This card is probably like a C tier, maybe bottom of B tier card. They probably top of C tier is probably a more fair place to put this card. The reason that this card isn't that great is, I'll tell you right now, actually. What this card basically does is if you control a Blue Eyes White Dragon or a Dark Magician, you can negate all monsters your opponent controls. That seems really, really good. because, wow, you're negating everything. You have to remember, this is on a trap card. So you have to set it, and then you have to activate it during your opponent's turn. When will you want to actually negate your opponent's all of the monsters your opponent controls? The first monster that they summon. If they summon, for example, an Aluber, you are activating this card. You're not waiting for a later point in the duel to activate this card. You want to activate it to negate that. So in reality, most of the time, you really are only negating one monster effect. It's written in a way where it's like, oh, you're going to negate like 50 cards. No, you're negating one card. Don't let them trick you. Next, the other thing that's kind of iffy about this card, again, this is like the only search card we have is either the Bingo Machine Go or the True Light. True Light will set it to your field, but since it's a trap card, True Light is a trap card, so you activate True Light, set this to your field during your opponent's turn. You can't activate it that same turn. You have to wait until it's back on your turn, so you never actually get to negate anything on your opponent's board. And that's kind of an issue with the card. You don't actually get to use it when you want it. The other thing is Bingo Machine Go does search this card, but unfortunately, you have to play 3 of this in order for that to be useful. And that's kind of the issue there. But overall, it's not like a bad card. If there was a way to like just in your opening hand get this card just for free, like like Phantom Knights, for example, they get 2 Fog Blades for free. If you could get 2 copies of this for free, I would play it. But I'm not going to build my entire deck around a monster negate. Like it's just not good enough. You can make so many better situations. You can make Baron the Flurry. You can make so many generic synchros and links and play generic traps like Skill Drain. You just every single version of Blue Eyes. There's cards that you can play that are generic that are just better than this card. Unfortunately, even though this is an in-archetype card, and theoretically it's really not even that bad of a card. Next is True Light. This is another one I never got to review last time. This is, depending on your build, S or A. This is probably around, on average, around here. You're never playing this in the going second build. You're never playing this in the combo build. But if you're playing the control build, this is pretty much like a staple. It's an S tier. Basically, what this card does is, number 1, if this card is sent to the graveyard, it destroys all monsters you control. That's actually a step up over the Dark Magician version of this card, which is the Eternal Soul, because the Eternal Soul, if it leaves the field, it blows up your board, but this specifically has to go to the graveyard. So if your opponent banishes this or bounces this, your board is safe. So that's pretty cool about this card. It has another effect where your Blue Eyes White Dragons, specifically Blue Eyes White Dragons, cannot be targeted by card effects. That, again, is an effect that is... it's decent. Like, your Blue Eyes can't be targeted. I would rather have had the just blanket unaffected protection that Dark Magician has, because the cool thing about having your monster be unaffected is that your opponent can still activate cards that target it, destroy it, and then you just go, oh, but my monster's unaffected, and they go, oh, can I take that back? Well, no, you can't, because it's unaffected. You activate it. With this card, they legitimately can't be targeted. So if your opponent like targets this and you're like, well, it can't be targeted, technically they can take back the play because this isn't a valid target and they didn't know. So that's kind of an issue about, like, that's one of the things that's better about Eternal Soul in this card. The rest of this card is actually better than Eternal Soul, which is, number 1, you can summon a Blue Eyes from your hand or graveyard, non-targeting, so you don't like target in the graveyard. You just say, I'm summoning a Blue Eyes, and even if your opponent calls by the grave the one in the graveyard, you can just summon the one from your hand, for example. On top of that, it has another effect where it can set any Blue Eyes card from your deck, any card that specifically lists Blue Eyes White Dragon, a spell or trap card that lists specifically Blue Eyes White Dragon in its text, you can set that card into your back row if you don't already have it in the graveyard. So you have to, it has to be different. You cannot, and that again kind of conflicts with Bingo Machine Go. With Bingo Machine Go, you want to play as many copies of a card that you want to open. Like if you want to specifically open with Destined Rivals, you have to play 3 Destined Rivals, 3 Bingo Machine Goes. But if you have Destined Rivals in the graveyard already, you can't put it in the you can't set into your back row with the True Light, which is like super weird and inconsistent. Again, just weirdness. So I really don't like this. All of the issues of this deck just sort of like somehow come back to Bingo Machine Go. But yeah, you can set any spawn trap card that lists Blue Eyes White Dragon in its text. There's quite a few that you can set. You can set Ultimate Fusion. You can set the Destined Rivals. You can set Bingo Machine Go, which is actually, despite everything that I've said about it, one of the better targets. You can set United, this thing in Strength and Numbers. You can set Rampage, Burst Stream. You can't search that. And that's about it. That is every... Oh, and Ultimate Creature of Destruction. Those are all of the cards that you can set into your back row using this card, as long as you don't have it in the graveyard. That effect is actually really, really good. It's better than, again, the Dark Magician version, which specifically only searches Thousand Knives and Dark Magic Attack. This can essentially search any card that says Blue Eyes White Dragon in its text, making it significantly better. Again, one of the drawbacks is that a lot of the Blue Eyes cards just don't mention Blue Eyes White Dragon in their text, which makes them sort of a lot worse. Like, there's just, by nature, those cards are just not as good as others. Like, I would love to be able to set Mausoleum into my back row, but it just doesn't mention Blue Eyes White Dragon, unfortunately. But yeah, that's kind of the issue with that card. Overall, the card's very good in the control build. Like, it's absolutely disgusting in the control build. It gives you a free Blue Eyes every single turn, and if you don't get a Blue Eyes, it gives you a free Spawn Trap card every single turn. If you don't open with a Blue Eyes, you just set a Big Machine Go, and then you can reveal 3 Blue Eyes, and now you have Blue Eyes. Like, it's one of the more important cards in the control build of the deck. Lastly, this is the last card. We've got Ultimate Creature of Destruction. This card is a B tier. I probably put it somewhere around here. It's the second best card to set. Well, no, the best card to set is Ultimate Fusion. The second best card is Bingo Machine Go. The third best card is Ultimate Creature of Destruction. The fourth is the Destined Rivals to set off of the True Light. This card is actually quite good. What it does is you target a Blue Eyes monster that you control, and then that monster becomes unaffected by all other card effects except for its own. If it battles an opponent's monster, that opponent's monster is destroyed during the end phase. I'm sorry, is destroyed during the end of the damage step. I didn't mean to say during the end phase. So that effect is actually quite good. It basically makes it so it's physically impossible for you to lose the duel during that turn unless you get Kaiju'd. But basically, you cannot lose the duel that turn. This card also is the only spell and trap card in the entire archetype, with the exception of Mausoleum, that actually has a graveyard effect. This is the only one. Basically, what it does is if you summon a Blue Eyes White Dragon to your side of the field, you can set this into your back row, but then it gets banished when it leaves the field. That effect is also really, really good because you are constantly summoning Blue Eyes White Dragon, and of course, alternative counts as Blue Eyes White Dragon, so whether you summon alternative, whether you summon Blue Eyes, you get this card into your back row. So you basically always are guaranteed to get 2 uses out of this card in the deck. And it's very good. It's good on offense. It's good on defense. It can actually help you out boards. It's really, really good in combination with 2 different cards. Now, specifically, it's very good with Twin Burst because you can use this on Twin Burst, and if your opponent has really, really difficult to out monsters, you can attack them with Twin Burst, and then during the end of the damage step, Twin Burst will banish, so you can just crash, take damage, crash, take damage, and then out 2 monsters that would typically be a nightmare to out, like, for example, like a Crusadia Avermax, or that is, like, protected by IP, or like a Dragoon, for example, or like just a monster with just a lot of attack that's tough to out. It's actually pretty good for outing those things. So I like that card quite a bit. Yeah, that's pretty fair. Now, for this last portion of the video, this is a new portion of the video. What can this deck use? Like, what can they do about this archetype that would make it better? And to a certain degree, I'm going to leave it open-ended to you guys. If you guys have any suggestions, obviously put in the comment section below. But what this deck really, really needs is a new level 1 tuner. I think Konami's been dancing around it. I don't know why they haven't released one. The last time that a level 1 tuner was released, this deck went to Worlds. This deck was the best deck in the metagame, and it won the World Championship, and it was the best deck in the metagame. We have not gotten a new level 1 tuner since 2016, I want to say. Was the last time. I don't remember the exact time where Shining Victory came out, but I'm pretty sure it's 2016, maybe 2017. I think it's been about 6 years since a level 1 tuner has come out. Since then, we've gotten some cards that have been pretty good. Stuff like Jet, stuff like Dictator is actually kind of good. The Fusion is actually kind of good. We've gotten some good Fusion monsters, actually, since then. We've gotten a cool degree of trap cards, for example, that have been decent. So a lot of different builds of Blue Eyes have sort of popped up. Control Blue Eyes never really existed. It was never anything to do with a trap archetype, and now it's somewhat, the trap build might actually be the best build, just because the deck has been sort of slowed down to a certain degree. It's nowhere near as fast as the rest of the meta. So I think that one thing that the deck could certainly use is a new level 1 tuner. Another card that the deck can use is honestly just a better search card. Bingo Machine Go just does not fulfill the requirements that the deck needs. It's extremely random and weird. We need a way to search stuff like Mausoleum, search stuff like Mausoleum, search stuff, just cards that are not in the search, cards that cannot be searched by this card, in addition to like the stones and the level 1 tuners and stuff like that. That's probably what it needs. It needs cards that are more consistent, a more consistent searcher. It needs a stone and maybe a level 8 dragon that special summons itself, and that's about all the deck, all the cards that the deck I think would actually require. What the deck definitely doesn't need is cards like Chronicle Magician and Chronicle Sorceress. These cards are just atrocious. I think they need to totally divide Dark Magician and Blue Eyes. They were never meant to be one archetype. They were never meant to share cards. They do two different things entirely. Dark Magician is a spell and trap archetype that is extremely consistent. It does the same thing over and over and over. It's a very consistent archetype. It has a lot of consistency cards in it. Blue Eyes is more of a power archetype. These archetypes were never meant to mix, and as a result, we are getting cards that are subpar in both archetypes. If you notice, a lot of the cards that say Blue Eyes and Dark Magician on their text are not played by either archetype. Like, for example, these two are not played by either archetype. This is not played by either archetype. This is not played by either archetype outside of a one-of. This is the best of the cards that are both, that mention both Dark Magician and Blue Eyes, and neither of, and it's played at maybe a one-of, maybe. So I think there needs to be a huge division between Dark Magician and Blue Eyes. They were never meant to be played together. Those cards need to stop today. Other than that, I actually have liked some of the support that Konami has released. I think Jet Dragon is a really good card, in addition to some of the other ones that I've said. But thank you for watching. This has been a lot of fun to make. Some of these rants have been a ton of fun to go through here. But if you enjoyed this video, definitely leave a like, and thank you for watching. La, 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 la.